It's tough out there.
Hmm. And I think that's actually a perfect segue into our first topic then. So,
That's
for
what I'm
the
here for.
exactly. So, if you remember from last week, there is a piece on Polygon with regards to too many indie games. I'm going to see if I can find it here. Let's see. Of course, with the Ray Polygon posted stuff, it's hard to find the older articles. Let's see. Here we go. There we go. So, the article itself talked with several people in the independent space, such as the developer behind Gods Will Be Watching. Let's see. Is that who all they talked to? No, it has to be more
No,
than that.
there were a few
Yeah.
others.
House Key, who did Next Machina. Let's see.
Devolver. I think they
Mm-hmm.
talked to Landfall. I'm just scrolling up through the article.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Yep, and a few more people. And the whole point of the article was discussing the topic of people or developers having a tough time getting their games into people's hands. And the whole article's point is that there are too many video games being released. And I kind of see it, but I think it's kind of a half answer. But I want to throw things over to you first, Rob, considering you have a background both with indie game publishing and at a AAA studio when it comes to publishing. So, after you read the article, what do you make of it?
I thought it was 2 years too late. Is what I thought when I read it. Because yeah, I have. I've been involved in a game that sold under 50 copies. And it is a fun feeling to have when
Oh,
you're
yeah.
involved in a game that does that. And there's one line that I want to bring out. Actually, I'll do that when we wrap up this topic. But like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a gut punch. It's especially sickening because if you don't recognize it long before it happens, which I did. I had that feeling like a year before. I just like knew that the sales were not going to be good,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no way to change it at that point, um, for a wide variety of reasons. But like, yeah, it's not a good feeling, and you have this. As you try to get it in people's hands, whether or not they like it, because you will. I think the article does have people who love the games that they are bringing out, and you get
Mm-hmm.
really good positive feedback, and then it doesn't translate into sales, and that it sucks. And
Yeah.
then being on a AAA title like I'm on now, that sells millions upon millions, and they do discuss the fact that a major publisher will just not even blink in saying no to a game that could sell a few million.
Mm-hmm.
It's now in the like 10 million or so is what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the major publishers are probably going to be not wanting to not care because the money ratio of the cost benefit is not as good as any of the other titles. So it's a weird dichotomy because I do feel much more secure, even though there's no such thing in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Anything could happen. The next like tomorrow, everything could just uh, go nuts and everyone's gone. But um, it is being on both sides of that, and having worked at THQ about a year before they closed, and
Mm-hmm.
it's weird. But yeah, working on small titles. That's a tough one because yeah, I've been on the like small success, and I've been on the just break even, and I've been on the horrible failure. So it's a tough. It's just tough. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how indie developers do it. I don't know what convinces them to do it. Obviously, passion, going to school, and just having that being young and having that the world's my oyster kind of feeling. But once you hit that reality of I need to live off of what I earn, and you see what the average indie game is making. Um, oh, hey, 13 DG. Yes and no. It's rewarding in the fact that you get a lot of, you're really involved in the game. You know every ounce of it. Backwards and forwards. You're like I was very tied to the developers. We were friendly and we were just close. Uh, but you kind of get slapped in the face when the game launches, because it is, you put all this effort, you put all
Mm-hmm.
this, heart into it, and it either does or doesn't fulfill what your expectations. But even then, you have to move on to the next project, and you're more forced to pay attention to what is popular out there, what you need to do to survive. That's when it stops becoming fun, and just you realize that it is an absolute job. And it's mentioned in the article that you find yourself just working all hours to
Mm-hmm.
both market and make the game. And
Yep.
it's yeah, you don't get a sniff of rest. And then in the AAA company, well, certainly it's a little more cold, and you don't get as close to the project no matter what position you're in. There's a sense of community there. Everyone's working on a project, and there's dozens of people you're working with, so you're all in it together. I can't speak towards a failure company. Actually, I can a little bit, but yeah, I've actually been there now that I think about it. Thanks for the flashbacks. Just joking. But no, it is. It's just it's a tough field to be in. While you're working on a project and you're young and it's your project, it's very exciting. But the reality hits pretty quick, whether you're successful or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as you said there, Rob, with regards to having that freedom to work on your passion project, we have spent many a podcast discussing those topics and how it's very easy to become blinded by your game project. That, if I spend 3 to 5 years on this game, surely it will pay dividends, and I'll sell 500,000 copies, and I'll pay off my house, and I can retire, and all that. And unfortunately, for a lot of developers out there, either A, they don't have the expertise to actually build that dream game, or B, it can lead to, as we've said, a death by a thousand cuts issues of, oh yes, I'm going to make a game, but I'm not going to do PR, or I don't know how to manage a team, or I don't even know, even just basic UI design. And we see this from a lot of smaller developers where they'll just go all in on their very first game without any real knowledge as to how to even make a game to begin with. And
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but as I keep posting, on Twitter and social media about how I want to look at more interesting games, I get titles from people who say, this is my first game, this is my dream game. I've been spending 2 to 3 years of my life. I'm a sole developer on this game, and I play it, and like 2 minutes in, I'm seeing major design flaws that wouldn't hold muster anywhere, let alone if you're trying to release this game to convince someone to buy it.
Yeah, it's tough because you do when you're by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to have an objective view, and then
Mm-hmm.
if you get an objective view from someone else, the likelihood of you taking that advice that you might get is entirely dependent on your confidence in your abilities and your ability to take criticism.
Oh yeah.
And those two things are the most difficult things to balance because you don't know. Other people might know, but you don't know who knows, and it's your baby, so you know best how to deal with that.
And how dare you tell me how to make my game, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that happens, but it usually doesn't manifest like that.
Mm-hmm.
It manifests in a way where it's like, well, I hear what you're saying, but this is what I thought, and it's easy to convince yourself one way or the other because you really have you thought about it for dozens of hours, if not weeks worth of time spent trying to make a decision, and then someone comes in and says the decision's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they obviously didn't think about it as long as you did, so.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to keep objectivity when you're the sole developer or one of two or three.
Yeah. And I think you can probably agree with this one, Rob, that for a lot of the games that fail, it's a lot about what they didn't know that got them rather than what they do know in terms of trying to build the game, market it, and so on and so on.
It's true, but at the same time, even knowing something like, and I don't mean like knowing like in your own head whether or not it's true. I mean having experience and knowing something and it being wrong, or it not applying, and not like recognizing its application. That's tough. Like let's say the genre you're making is out of fashion. You may know that, you may recognize it, but or you may know that yours is the best of that genre, but
Hmm.
it doesn't help.
Yeah. And there's also a lot the term the sunk cost fallacy that I've spent a year of my life working on this game already. I have so much sunk into it. I can't move on to something else. I gotta get this game finished.
Yeah, and to Pine Grosbeak's, I'll just call you Pine. To your statement where there's always a place for a fresh view. Yes, there absolutely is.
Hmm.
But sometimes, like you're too far down the path, or you're too, you've kind of set yourself in a particular decision or a particular direction, and it's hard to get out of that. Whether or not you have the fresh view, whether or not you actually listen a lot of the
Hmm.
time, you may listen 90% of the time, but that 10%, you just guess wrong on it. It happens, and it can be catastrophic. It can be minor, but it usually doesn't help.
Yeah. Hey, Dragon, thanks for coming on as well. Yeah, and that's always been one of the things we've seen about when it comes to indie versus AAA development. We've talked about this one before. How most indie games are released, we see some of the most unique titles come from independent developers, but they're not always the most refined. Again, I'm sure everybody watch, I'm sure Rob can agree with this. We've played our fair share of indie games that have bugs or major technical issues or may not look, it may use very basic graphics. Like, you're not getting a 100% polished game, but you are getting it with that unique take. Again, I can start rattling off interesting independent games for like the next 20, 30 minutes like it's nothing. But the problem is, and I think this is one thing that a lot of developers, even those who are established, tend to forget, that uniqueness by itself doesn't really sell a game. If you make something that's so unique but nobody can play it, there's no reference point, and you can't explain it to someone, are they really going to risk 10, 20, $30 on that game? Or are they going to pick a genre that they know? Or even a game that combines their genre? Like we've seen with, action roguelikes, FTL, Into the Breach, which again, there's two very unique indie games right there.
Yeah, and those games are oddly the kind of games that indie developers reference as
Mm-hmm.
those made it, and mine's just as good, so I'm gonna make it, obviously.
I'm going to be the next FTL, or I'm going to make the next Five Nights at Freddy's to keep with the horror theme of October here.
Yeah.
But I think there's two big points. I know I've talked about this. I think we've even talked about this on a previous cast. One is that you can't just chase after somebody else. Because if you're trying to beat FTL or beat Darkest Dungeon, your game's going to be compared directly to it. So unless your game is better than those established genres or franchises, you're just going to be looked at as, the cheap alternative. And then the second point is we see this from a lot of developers who say, I'm just going to make an FTL game, or this is going to be my FTL Darkest Dungeon XCOM game. But they don't really understand what made those games work. Not just from like a mechanic standpoint, but just in terms of how the systems operate together. And I'll give you an example. You missed this last week, Rob. I was playing this game called Depth of Extinction. It's kind of, the developers describe it as FTL meets XCOM. And it only has that like the most surface layer in terms of its design. There's no multi-system design like in XCOM. There's no real interaction in terms of like your ship or crew members like in FTL. And it just kind of feels like developers are trying to get that marketing push. But again, without understanding why these games work, then all you're doing is making a lesser product. And then you're left wondering, well, this game has turn-based strategy. It must be an XCOM. So why aren't the XCOM fans buying it? Or, my game features scary animatronics. So why am I not getting picked up by all the Five Nights at Freddy's fans?
Mm. Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons that I can point to for that. None of which are going to make you sell millions or make you millions of dollars. But one of the things I point to is that the best way to get your game noticed and sold, especially to a niche audience, is to be very heavily invested in that community before you start making the game.
Hmm.
Because if you do make that XCOM game, well, you're going to want XCOM people to know about it from the get go, and the objective viewpoints, they're going to be the ones to tell you, okay, well, this is why I think that the game works, and this is what I love about XCOM. So, maybe sneak that in there or something, or some variant.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're making a game and it's part of a genre that you're kind of pointing to, make sure you're part of that community, because that's the only way you're going to get known and actually get some good advice.
Yeah. And this is actually a really good lead in, because I'm going to be, I think this week is going to be the podcast I did with John, I think his name is Lumpkins, who was from Pavonis Interactive. They did the Long War mod for XCOM Enemy Unknown, for XCOM 2, and now they're working on their own game. And during that cast, we talked about how he's a huge XCOM fan. And the whole basis for the Long War mod was basically saying, I like XCOM, but I also want deeper gameplay here. So I'm going to do it myself. And him and his team, they understood what made XCOM work. And you could argue they got even closer to Firaxis, because Firaxis invited them to make the Long War 2 mod for XCOM 2. But the point is, they understood what works and what didn't work with XCOM Enemy Unknown, and say, I want to make things better, or I want to make things different. And again, we see this, and again, I keep saying this, everyone here is watching this can probably cite examples of this, of games they've played where developers said, oh, so-and-so was a major inspiration, but you're not really gaining that same feeling. We see many developers try to emulate Spelunky, that's another big example, as a action roguelike. But we've yet to see the quote-unquote Spelunky killer, and I doubt we're going to see an FTL killer or a Darkest Dungeon killer anytime soon.
Yeah, and when you comment about mods, I mean, not only are those a great place to learn, but you're already active in a community. Chances are, if you're making a mod, there's no money in a mod, so you certainly get notoriety, and you can branch off of that.
And I want to talk about, if I forget this, Rob or chat, please remind me. I also want to talk about their thoughts on Fortnite and lifestyle games as well. I want to talk about that in the next few minutes. But again, keeping with this idea of if there are too many video games, I don't know if I really believe that. I think, as a lot of people say, the cream will always rise to the top. But I think the issue for a lot of people is that they don't understand why these games became popular. I mentioned this last week when I talked about an article that Tanya Short from Kid Fox Games wrote on Gamma Sutra about the success of Boyfriend Dungeon, and how she equated to, it wasn't just spending 6 months to a year working on this Kickstarter. It was spending the last 5 years of their lives at Kid Fox building a community, building marketing, understanding how to get the word out and stuff like that, and that all translated into massive sales, or to this massive awareness. I'm sure Boyfriend Dungeon, even if it doesn't, crack top 10 or IGN on Steam, is still going to be a very recognizable game for the studio. But the point is that for a lot of people who sit there saying, oh, there's just too many games, or my game's never going to get mentioned, I have to throw this question at them as to, what did you do to get word out about your game? Do you make regular posts? Do you have a Twitter following? Do you even show footage of your game on YouTube? Because, as we've said before, you can't just have an interesting game and expect it to do well anymore.
Yeah, and certainly I've worked with a few developers who are very bad at and to call it just social media is a little bit of a undercutting what you need to do, but communicating with the fans, communicating with people who aren't yet fans, and reaching out to a community is very much part of that. An old company I used to work for, I looked up their Twitter page, and the only stuff they had on their Twitter page were basically ad posts, posts that are definitively marketing, like, this is what's happening in our game today, come and check it out, with zero comments and zero
Mm-hmm.
retweets. And that's the part where, you feel a little bad because they're getting zero traction. Um, but you really do. You have to be very invested and very involved. And I'll just bring out the quote from the article itself. It's from Nigel Laurie, who I don't know that name at all. Um, but the quote goes, even when you have a publisher, as a developer, now more than ever, your job is to get people interested in your game, period, not just when scrolling through Steam. So basically, that just means you have to be the face of the game. It doesn't matter if you have a publisher or not. And I often recommend that, you don't go to a publisher because they can't necessarily do the marketing that you want to have done, that you need to have done.
Mm-hmm.
Indie games, especially, indie game players want to connect with the developer, not some faceless
Mm-hmm.
publisher. So, and I learned that the hard way, but as a publisher. So, like, that's like that's lesson one in modern indie game development is, like you say, spending the time really getting involved in the marketing and the community you're going to sell to. Make your customers involved, because people don't like to not be listened to. People don't like to not be
Mm-hmm.
referenced. It's a rare game that comes out of nowhere. Whether or not it's gonna, like, whether or not it's the cream of the crop. A game
Mm-hmm.
that comes out of nowhere to capture the imaginations of people it's like, I don't even know how to describe how rare that is.
Mm-hmm. About sharing dev process on Twitch, I would say yes, that can help, but it really depends on the audience that you're going to get. I think the maybe Rob, maybe you can elaborate on this more than I can, but it feels like the people who would watch game dev on Twitch wouldn't necessarily be the same as the people who would play that game. It seems like it could be more for people studying game design rather than playing it.
Yeah, and that's another issue that you bring up, that developers, especially indie devs, that's its own community. But developers don't buy other developers' games, and they never will. If you're
Mm-hmm.
lucky, you are friends with a developer with a popular game, and that developer gives you a shout out. That's no different than having a popular YouTuber grab your game and give it a shout out. But if you share your development process, I mean, that's very interesting to a lot of players. And it is a fascinating process for both devs and, I think, fans. But inviting the fans to participate is the important part. I think making sure that you recognize their voices is a very important part, especially for indie devs.
Yeah. And I think another really big point, what you just said there, Rob, about developers don't buy other developers' games, is when we see games that have a critical reception, but a commercial flop. And a good example of this would be the game Where the Water Tastes Like Wine from a few months ago, where a developer posts like an entire post-mortem thought about the failure of the game on Medium about 2 to 3 weeks after the release. And you'll hear this from a lot of indie fans who say that, yeah, we don't care, if so and so developer likes your game if we have problems with your game to begin with. And this is another case of we play this on stream, and it was like, yeah, it's a game. Like, I don't, like, nobody who was watching me play, or I think who's played the game, thought, yeah, all those developers who were throwing heaps of praise at this game knew what they were talking about. And unfortunately, it's one of those cases where just because you're and this actually is another big point there. You can't just rely on your friends and family to say that your game is good. You need to get your game in front of as many people as possible. And again, this is why I think Kickstarter and Early Access have been integral tools for independent development these last few years. Because you are essentially getting your own massive playtesting base. Well, if they do decide to try your game out, of course, because we've seen cases where that doesn't happen. But it is a way of allowing to get that outside look at your game of people who are interested, but they don't have the rosa tinted specs of, this is a perfect game, there's nothing wrong with it. But and I'm going to go to one more point, and then I'll throw it back over to you, Rob. Like, this is one of the things that really annoys me. Like I said before, I've lost any semblance of patience for issues with a game that I spot in the first 5 to 10 minutes of play. Be it from a UI point of view, be it from the gameplay not working, even if it's just technical issues. If you can't get like the first 10 minutes of your game to be perfect and without problems, I don't care about your game anymore at that point, because I have several dozen other games of developers who have probably spent more time on that than you did to get into those titles.
Yeah, and that is the curse of the YouTuber. You know, you can speak to this way more, but I know that from the publisher, you send out as games to as many YouTubers as humanly possible, and that'll bite you in the butt sometimes. But like, yeah, if it's not right, and a YouTuber's nice enough to give your game some time, you're basically saying, hey, you just wasted time on, you just wasted the YouTuber's time, and that makes them less likely to try it out again when it's been better or something like that, been improved. And yeah, Pine. By the way, I wanted to mention, yeah, it's cool that you do buy your fellow devs games. I think that's a very very good thing to do. It's very nice, because you do that thing gets like that gives you a good reputation, and that's important. That's very important in any community. But yeah, you don't want to waste your potential publicist's time. You know. A popular YouTuber or whatever, that's worth its weight in gold. Even YouTubers that aren't mega popular, you don't want to piss them off. You know what I mean? Like, because word gets around, and also you have enough YouTubers that are of mid-size, you're gonna do well. You know, but that one that needle in a haystack that looks at your game publicly, that has, you know, several 100,000 or 1 million followers, don't depend on that.
Yeah.
But make sure it's good enough, you know.
Yeah, you don't want your marketing strategy for your game to just be the line, "Get PewDiePie to play my game." That's not what you want your entire strategy to be. And what 13's saying, well, surely games should be prototype. Well, yes, I mean, obviously everyone's going to prototype their game, but again, we get back to that blinders view of, you know, I like my game, so surely 500,000 people out there must like it as well. And we've seen games that go all the way through prototype to alpha, beta, aiming to release, and still have issues to them. Maybe they didn't catch it in playtesting. Maybe somebody reported it, but they didn't pay attention. Maybe they didn't think it was such a big deal. But the problem is that there's so many things that can ruin a game beyond just having your game, you know, blow up somebody's computer because you didn't program it right. But I mean, I've played games where the controls feel weird, where even when it's a low polygon or low quality graphics game, it's still stuttering, and there's frame loss or memory leaks and stuff like that. And the problem is that for so many new developers starting out, the dream is that anybody can make a video game. The nightmare is that only a handful of those people can actually make a quality product at the end of the day. And I won't get your thoughts on this, Rob, because I may get myself into trouble, and I think I'll throw you in as well with this.
Of course.
But like I said, like, I've had a chance to look at, or I stalk around various Facebook groups and stuff like that from independent developers, and they post images of their games and screenshots and stuff like that, and a lot of the stuff just looks horrible. Like, it looks like, you know, like a college or even a high school project that you're trying to sell your game on. And like, I keep saying this, but it just feels like too many people are trying to make video games, but they're not really understanding why these games are working or how to actually make a product, rather than just making like a 5 to 10 minute prototype or a testing platform.
Yeah, and that is tough. There's an interesting article that I ran across a while ago. It has nothing to do with games, but yet it has to do with getting your game out there, and it has to do with the popularity of the Red Delicious apple. The Red Delicious apple, which in many cases is not delicious. It's kind of bland. And the reason it got popular was apparently in the 50s or 40s, when grocery stores were just supermarkets were just starting to become the thing. They went for a produce that was very attractive. So an apple that's very shiny and very vibrant became the one that people go after. And then from there, it just became mass produced, and it became that fruit that you kind of stick in your meal to be, healthy, quote. And so it became the apple of choice, and then it was just the number one apple. This on the sheen, it looked great, but on the delve any deeper, and it's not that great. Um, Sadly, in games, it's kind of the same thing. You get a game that looks amazing,
Hmm.
and No Man's Sky is one of those that I reach towards, even though it's much better now. I believe it didn't have a right to get to this point because it launched with the sheen but no substance,
Hmm.
or limited substance, and that's unfair right now to say because it has made
Yeah.
tremendous strides, and kudos to the developers for making that happen. But a game that doesn't look good, it's going to be passed over because it gives you that feeling that it's not a quality game. And the fact is, I play a lot of games that don't look great. Dwarf Fortress.
Hmm.
There's a baseball simulator, out of the park baseball.
Hmm.
Like there's a bunch of simulation games that don't look pretty, but they have a fan base because they're very deep, and
Oh yes.
that'll eventually get you somewhere. But it's mining for gold at that point, mining
Yeah.
for diamonds.
And I think that's another really good point there. Like, we talked about this I think a week or so ago with the games from Soldak Entertainment. He makes some of the most complicated ARPGs that you will never find anyone else. They put stuff like Diablo and Titan Quest to shame in terms of the intricacies of their character designs and just the progression curve. But where he has in the gameplay, he has nothing in terms of quality of life, of UI design. The game, again, you look at screenshots of Din's Legacy, it looks like a game from about 15, 20 years ago. There's nothing that's attracting somebody who isn't already a fan to Soldak to play Din's Legacy. And I can't do that as well. I can say how deep these games are, but when I say that the UI is hard to follow, or the screen just evolves into this very basic mess of textures and special effects, who's really going to spend money on that game when they have Diablo 3, when they have Grim Dawn, Torchlight, you name it, so on and so forth? And again, this is where I think a lot of first-time developers tend to mess up on, because it is a very big deal. Art is expensive. I'm not an artist. I don't think, Rob. Are you? Do you have any artistic talent there?
Oh, I'm great at doodles. I'm
Well, you beat
fabulous at
me.
doodles.
I've seen kindergartners draw better than me, so I'm I'm below you there. But the point is, and yeah, like 13 said, art is hard, but it's also the first thing people see. And like I said, I've seen games from like developers that it just looks like a high school project. The character may not even have any walk cycles. It's just like the guy moving like this, like stuck in a pose going forward. And this is the part, again, this is where I think I may get into trouble, that I am sure there are independent developers getting ready, if they're watching this right now, either live or recorded, they're going to leave a comment below saying,
That's funny, 13. I appreciate that very much.
but I am sure they're going to say some along the lines of, well, I'm putting my heart and soul into this gameplay. Surely you can look past the art to play this game. But then I'm going to throw it back and say that if your art is lousy, chances are your UI isn't going to be that easy to follow as well. And most of the time it is. Like, again, I play games where the keyboard commands are use asterisk, ampersand, and percent sign to move. Or we're going to use the backslash key as our primary function for our game. And again, a lot of the stuff it's always about these little things that add up to success. But there's just so many things to get covered that most people don't even know it. I'm going to throw it to you, Rob, while I cough off mic.
Well, I think this goes back to what I was saying about being involved in the communities. Because if you don't have a pretty art game, but you're heavily involved in your niche community,
Yeah.
then you're more likely to get people to look past any sheen problems and love the gameplay for what it is. And that's Dwarf Fortress all over. It got super lucky. It was a free game, so that helped.
Yep.
But like that game has the worst UI. I think its art is beautiful, but that's an ASCII fan's kind of opinion, but its UI is just horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
So if you depend on Steam to show your game to take that front page for however long it gives you
Yeah.
these days, if your game doesn't look good, people are going to click right past it. There's too many games that look like they were made in RPG Maker and without without a lot of love, but they might have great stories and very long gameplay and an amazing balance.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to look past that part, like Josh was saying. It's
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of can leap to that conclusion of, well, if the art doesn't look great here, well, what's my experience going to be like? It might be very deep gameplay, but am I going to be able to get past that first,
Mm-hmm.
that initialization, like that part where I have to try to make this game fun for me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's often not worth it in an era, and I know the article talks about hours in a day versus number of
Yeah.
players, and that's true. The number of dollars out there doesn't matter. People buy games all the time, but it's how long they spend playing the game, and thus how long they're going to spend getting to know it enough to suggest it to their friends.
Yeah. And like I said, and hold on. And like I said, when it comes to a lot of these games, I don't have patience anymore for dealing with issues like that. And I know, and this is one of the things that annoy me about the article from Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, where this water just tastes like water right here next to me, that he's talking about issues like, oh, people complain about, the game was too slow or was hard to follow and stuff like that. And, I didn't have any money for getting play testers and get into that. I was just sitting there going, dude, this was like 3 minutes into the game that these issues popped up. Like, this isn't something that happened 40 hours into this title. This is minute one, first impression stuff that gets in the way. And like I said, I don't have a tolerance for it anymore. I have too many games to play. I was talking to other Josh about this. Like, he told me that there was a study that says that most people only buy 4 games a year. I play 4 games a week at this point, so I
Yeah.
don't have that luxury of saying, oh, the game gets better 40 hours from now. That's when it'll be amazing. Oh, you missed that part too, Rob. The whole Assassin's Creed Polygon, where he tried to make an article defending that the first 15 hours of the game were bad, but then it picks up after that.
Yeah, no, it's like saying, well, the payoff at the end of the movie is going to be fantastic, but you have
Mm-hmm.
to sit through an hour and a half of nothing. Like a lot of modern horror movies kind of do that to you, but that's only 2 hours at most.
Mm-hmm.
And most people hate it when that happens. So,
Yeah.
real quick, Pines, is there any sense to make free games to make somewhat name as a developer? I mean, games with a few hours of gameplay. Sure, there's no reason not to
Mm-hmm.
release some free stuff to get out there, to get your name out there. I'd spend time in communities and stuff, because what you were saying, that a developer of Water and Wine said
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't afford playtesting. Playtesting is free.
Yeah.
That's AAA developer, AAA companies know that playtesting is free these days, and they take full advantage. I mean, they have big QA departments, but the fact
Mm-hmm.
is, you can't find everything in a AAA game, so they let the public find it, and then they patch it. Months later, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
a full year later, they'll get to a major patch.
Yep.
But yeah, playtesting is free, and you can take advantage of that, and use your marketing, use your establishing yourself in a community to help with that. Because I've not been on a community on Discord or just kind of talking with people that aren't excited to help out. I've been in a couple of
Mm-hmm.
playtesting and prototyping communities for board games and stuff, and boy, we love helping each other out.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there's problems unto itself for prototyping in that fashion, but like playtesting it's easy to come by, and people are excited to help out, and just go ahead and use that. But yeah, finding a small free game and making it available and getting some feedback there. One of the games that I worked on called Zavix Tower, publishing that, the developer did it. He really loved making his game. It was free at first, and then he ran into a wall because he was making zero money off of microtransactions. So he turned it into a paid game, and his community followed him, and
Yep.
were very happy to help him out because he listened to them and he spoke with them directly.
Mm-hmm. And I think another advantage of making free games, it also builds up your own technical skills as well. So that instead of you spending 5 years of your life trying to build your dream game, you can make little titles and kind of expand your knowledge, and you may never know. You could have one of those crazy ideas that you thought, I'm just going to throw this out as a free game. It could become big enough to be its own thing. I mean, with Super Meat Boy, for instance, the original version of Meat Boy was like a simple Flash game that Edmund McMillan did, and then he decided to turn that into his big release on XBLA, and, the history was set there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's to find a developer that hit it big on their first game.
Oh yeah.
That's not going to happen. Most developers have spent years coming out with, like you say, small titles, or have even launched major titles with no success, and they keep at it and keep stoking the flames of their fans, and you eventually can get to making a living at the very least. But it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of iteration, and making small games to get your skills up. That's what it's all about. And I'm just agreeing with Josh here.
Yeah, and I think, and I've said this last week, I think it bears mentioning here. Like I said, a lot of people only see the success. They see Darkest Dungeon as top bestseller on Steam. They didn't see Darkest Dungeon in early access. They didn't see Darkest Dungeon on Kickstarter. They didn't even see Darkest Dungeon with their little trailer videos they put out a year before release. And I think for a lot of people who jump in, like as you said, Rob, they think of it as, I'm going to take my first game and I'm going to build the next Minecraft. Or, we make that joke that, a studio who's never made another game before will get $100,000 and they will beat Minecraft with their own design. It's not going to happen.
No.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment on Viking's comment and 13 at the same time. I mean, Viking, that's perfect. Like, you're that person who's more than willing to play test, and then when your voice gets lost as a fan of games and as someone who's putting your time in to help, not taking advantage of that as a developer is kind of, it is a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Viking, that sounds terrible. Viking got a developer sending him death threats for finding a crash. I've had some of the experiences pointing out production schedule flaws to developers. So, and it's not death threats. I never got that, so I'm not going to comment on how horrible that must be. But yeah, it is a slap in the face for you to spend a lot of time giving a comment, giving multiple comments, trying to help, and not only do they not comment back, or not only not take the advice, but they don't comment back or say thanks anyways. Sheesh.
And I think, again, as you've been saying, Rob, there is a big deal about engaging and interacting with a community. It's the difference between a game having problems that nobody figured out versus a game having issues that the developer is told about and then they do fix it. Like with Arkin Games, I had a chance to play just a few of his titles, Chris Park, and there are big issues. I remember I found literally a problem where if I walked left instead of right, the entire game soft locked. And I posted it on their bug tracker, and he fixed it within about 24 hours. But again, that was a case of, yes, this game has problems with it, but he is more than willing to listen and get those corrected. Versus, again, somebody getting an entire spreadsheet of problems and going, I don't care about that. I just want to get this game out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And to 13's comment before about asking people to play test, that's fantastic. I mean, really, it is. And to Pine's comment, it is. It's per person, and you can't throw all developers into the same category, but you can't also throw in all fans into that same category. So, I mean, there's a lot of great comments going through the chat here.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah. And going back to what 13 said a few minutes ago with the indie games having pacing issues, I would generally agree with that as well. Again, for a lot of the independent games I've played, there's always a rough patch in some way to get into them. Even something that I love, like Renowned Explorers International Society by Abbey Games, the beginning of that game is rough. There's very little documentation or explanation of even how to play the game, and it kind of leaves it to you to figure it out. But it's also a game that asks you to spend 40 minutes to an hour playing and then saying, oh, you didn't understand this point 40 minutes ago? You lose, start again. And like, I still love that game, but it still is a hard game to recommend because of those issues. And like we've said, many AAA games don't suffer, at least on that front. They may so due to microtransactions and games as a service kind of issues, but in terms of presenting itself, they usually do really great jobs of, that first 15 to 20 minutes of the game being really impressive. I mean, I'm sure everyone can remember the first time they played a Souls game. And, the first 15 minutes of exploring and finding the big creature just comes out and kills you in one blow.
Yeah, and I know I keep bringing up the game, but you've had them on the show before, Cook Serve Delicious. They do the same thing. You play the first level and it crushes you on purpose just to kind of show you how complicated the game can get, and yet it's still easy to control. Yeah. And it does. Throwing you into the deep end is a lot of fun as long as it holds your hand enough of the way.
Mm-hmm. Now, we are about 47 minutes in, so I think let's begin to wrap up this topic, and then we'll do our weird games segment, and then we'll see what else we can talk about. But one thing that I did not forget about is with regards to the idea of lifestyle games. This was something mentioned in the article, and we talked about this on a previous section or segment of the show. The idea of growing games as a lifestyle, where you're not supposed to just play them for an hour here, an hour a day, but these are games you are playing for months, if not years at the end, or years throughout it. And the article, of course, mentioned Battle Royale games like Fortnite, PUBG, and so on. And this is a very interesting point about, again, there's only 24 hours in a day, even less than that, for people to spend time playing video games. So something has to give. If you are spending 5 to 6 hours of your day playing Warframe or Fortnite, what else are you going to be playing that day with besides having to eat, sleep, and go to a job? So what do you think about that when it comes to the lifestyle approach to some of these games we're seeing?
I mean, everybody's trying to get in on that. I mean, with the new Torchlight, they're an MMO. With Fortnite, it's the most popular game right now. So people just spend time playing it. It's not necessarily the most, it's a deep game, don't get me wrong. I haven't played too much of it, but I can speak to the fact that, it's mostly about the community. It's mostly about spending time with your friends and just enjoying the experience. But yeah, you spend hours and hours and hours. You're trying to improve your game. You're trying to be the best person, and there's many layers to being the best. I mean, first of all, winning a victory royale, or just improving and being the best overall. I mean, it's just that kind of concept goes so well to that, or goes hand in hand with that. And then games as a sport, you're spending hours and hours trying to get good enough to compete. So yeah, you got a couple of hours to screw around with another game maybe. And I know there's people who play both. They'll spend half their time playing a giant MMO and the other half their time playing Fortnite. And that leaves no room for small discoveries, except, like cell phones tend to get most out of that because, cell phones are always with somebody. When you're not playing a game in front of a computer or in front of a console, they're playing a cell phone game in commute or on the commode. So it's hard to get someone's PC time or console time outside of those kinds of games. Yeah.
And with regards to these massive games, it's always been that challenge of even from the competitive space, with developers all trying to be the next Street Fighter or the next Injustice or even Dragon Ball Fighter Z these days, that somebody who's a professional player, they're going to play the game that they're good at. Why should I leave the game that I'm hopefully winning tournaments on, or I'm being one of the top 100 players in the world, to try and play your game? And we're seeing this even in the CCG or TCG crowd, of a lot more developers trying to do that. Everyone's trying to be the next Hearthstone or the next Magic the Gathering. But how do you convince those people to try your game? Let alone, like as you just said, how do you convince someone who spends 12 hours a day playing Fortnite to try your experimental indie game that has no marketing, doesn't look all that interesting, but may have amazing gameplay to it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, certainly most of the audience is going to be the same audience that just doesn't play Fortnite or
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't play MMOs. Although it's hard for me to find like a game player out there who, whether or not they play Fortnite, they don't like Path of Exile. I know so many people who love to play who will not play Fortnite, who will not play a lot of these MMOs, but they'll play Path of Exile because it's an ARPG that's done really well that just has no end to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, we were talking about that earlier too, Viking, about there's always that barrier. And for developers who don't do anything to lessen or shorten that learning curve or that difficulty curve, they're going to lose out on a lot of people. Because again, why should I take time out of my day to spend 2 to 3 hours trying to learn your game when I can load up a game that I love and just play that? Or, as we are just talking about, play Fortnite or PUBG, or even the article mentioned like AAA games. You know, Red Dead Redemption 2 is coming out. The latest Assassin's Creed game just came out. There's Call of Duty, I'm sure, is going to be coming out in a month or so. So when you have these massive games with months of prototyping and iterating and refining to play, why should I try and learn your game? If your game annoys me in the first 5 minutes of play, I can just load up Call of Duty, quick match, and I'm in a high stakes octane battle that I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've had to fight that as well. Mm-hmm. And it's hard when you're making something completely new and experimental, because a lot of people will just use that as the basis for their game. It's 100% original, but how is someone supposed to learn how to play this game? You need to have something. And again, this is, I think, another one of those like death by 1,000 cuts issues, that I'm building a unique game, but I'm not going to pay attention to any UI conventions or standardizations. I just expect everyone to learn this game from, minute one. But if you have nothing for someone to latch on to, why should they play your title?
Yeah. I mean, this is a whole other discussion that maybe we can go into at some point, but there's the games that take advantage of the thought process of having a good look and having interesting, like 5 minutes worth of content just to get you to buy it. And then from there, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be a topic. Maybe we'll see if we can find some examples of that for next week or something.
Mm-hmm.
But let's wrap up this topic here. So I have some thoughts for myself, but I'll throw it to you first, Rob. Do you have anything to end this segment on?
Yeah, sure. I'll throw it out there. We've said a lot of like things that say, you know what, if you try to do an indie game, you better do this or else, and you better, do everything right, and it's not an enjoyable experience. But really and truly, if you're someone who has a passion for making games, and that's like, you feel like that's your calling. I mean, these are guidelines to help you get to where you want to be. Give it a shot. There's no reason not to give it a shot. Certainly just be aware of all the pitfalls and have fun with it. Make sure that you tell people about it all the way through and get people excited about it. So yeah, don't get disparaged. Don't get discouraged. Just do what you love and try to make other people love it as much as you, and make sure that is communicated properly. That's all.
Mm-hmm. I'm the same way too there, 13. Not in terms of electrical engineering or art, but just having a hard time with some of those puzzles. Yeah, and that's a discussion for another time as well, about different puzzle designs and appealing to different people. But for myself, like, to wrap up this topic, I think another big point again is the fact that everything is kind of being fed through the same filter in terms of games being released. Part of this, again, I think, is Steam's discoverability issue, or just discoverability in general. You have games like Din's Legacy, Five Nights at Freddy's, Stardew Valley, sitting next to stuff like No Man's Sky, Dark Souls, Call of Duty, and etc., etc. And even all the bunch of smaller games as well on that front. And we still haven't really found a way to separate these games, but still give them, their own fair shake. A lot of people, of course, talk about itch.io as kind of like the new bastion for independent games, smaller titles, as I think Pine was talking about earlier, with free games as well, with being able to just put whatever you want up there. But I think at the end of the day, you have to always, I think, measure your expectations when it comes to these games being released. Because you can spend 2 to 5 years of your game or your life working on a game, that doesn't mean it's going to sell 100,000 copies or even 50,000. And you have to, I think, be able to leverage all these different aspects together. Because as we talked about before with Jake Burkett and Cliff Harris, they've had successes in the game industry, but chances are most people aren't knowing who they are in the same way as they know Markiplier or Hideo Kojima or Shigeru Miyamoto. But they've managed to survive and thrive making the games they want. But it all comes down to being able to manage your expectations and apply that to how you want to build your game. They're not spending 15 years of their life working on a video game, no matter how much they think it's going to be a success. They understand, as you said as well earlier, Rob, understand that at the end of the day, a paycheck has to come in if you want to keep making video games for a living. If you want to do this as, a part-time or hobbyist thing, you can certainly do that. But you can't make a game the same way as a hobbyist as you would a full-time game developer.
Yep. 100%.